Warm welcome to this keynote. My name is Abhishek Kumar. It's great to be here with all of you. Thank you for inviting me, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to all of you. And today, we will talk about this topic, which is beyond KPIs, systemic leadership, right? So, first of all, the topic is a little bit loaded, right? It has words that might be slightly difficult. So let's just demystify what are some of these words. So first we are talking about KPI. KPI is a corporate jargon. It's a word that means key performance indicator, right? It's something that you measure your performance by. So as students, all of you must be very, very familiar with one KPI. What is that? Marks, right? So marks are an example of a KPI. When you go on to the corporate world, you will have KPIs like sales targets, you might have customer service scores, you might have profitability of the organization, the net profit, so on and so forth, right? So whatever number you use to measure your success with is what a KPI is. Everybody who understands this, just raise your hands. Yes? Don't want to see any hands down, right? Everybody got this. Wonderful. Next, we talk about systemic. So systemic simply means not looking just at the part, but at the whole, isn't it? Just like, for example, you just look at the marks of a person. Can you define or understand what the person is as a whole? Isn't it? No. In fact, the reason for organizing such summits is because we do understand that there is something beyond marks, isn't it? There is something happening that is beyond the exam scores that you get, that is important, that is responsible for the development of the whole individual. That is why we are focusing on beyond KPIs. So now you see beyond KPIs, systemic leadership. Does that make sense? So we live in a world that is obsessed with metrics, right? If you're on social media, you're obsessed with likes, shares, comments, isn't it? You're obsessed with number of times your videos have been watched, right? You're obsessed with followers. If you're in marketing, you're obsessed with click-through rates, conversions. If you're wearing one of those Apple watches, you're obsessed with steps walked, heart rates logged. For everything, there is a number, isn't it? There are these detailed Airtable and these notes, templates available on the web where you can track every aspect of your life down to the minutes and seconds and how you spend them. In the financial world, you have credit scores, spending patterns. In personal info as a measurable currency, and of course, we do that. We give our data, and in response to that, we get some free services. I want to talk to you about how these metrics are essential but not absolute. What might happen is we might end up looking at the metrics so closely that we miss the bigger picture, right? And I want to present a puzzle to you. This is the image of a plane, right? And this is a plane, this is an image that they created when planes were returning from the Second World War. So these planes would go in to the war zone. There would be a lot of retaliatory fire on the planes. They would take a lot of bullets. And these are the bullet holes that the planes would experience, right? So why is this important? Because this tells us where the planes were hit with bullets, isn't it? And a solution that the engineers at the time came up with was to fortify the plane or make the planes stronger in those places where they were hit the most, so that the planes would not be hit by those bullets, because that's where the enemy was attacking them. So that's very interesting. They looked at the data, where were the bullet holes, and they made a decision. Sounds like a logical thing to do, but it was the wrong decision. And I'll tell you why at the end of this speech, right? So hang on till then. But meanwhile, I'll give you a few more examples, right? So let's see. The first principle is the principle of unintended consequences. When we look at only data and we go only by data, we make the mistake of not looking at the bigger picture, and that can have unintended consequences. This is the photograph of a king cobra, right? Now what happened was, in 1800s, the British government decided to reduce the number of cobras in the country, in India, colonial India. So they started a scheme. What they said was, we will track number of cobras captured. So everybody went out, started capturing cobras. So if cobras are captured and killed, then the number of cobras should come down, right? But what happened? Can anybody guess what happened? What did the enterprising Indians rebelling against colonial leaders do? Yes, sir.
The number of cobra things increased exponentially to the rate where they couldn't manage them anymore.
But why did that happen? Why did the rate of cobras, number of cobras increase? You're right.
Because instead of going out and capturing cobras, people started breeding.
Absolutely, right? So people started breeding the cobras, right? So they started capturing the cobras, but they wouldn't give them to the British. They started breeding the cobras because now the reward was for capturing a cobra. So they started breeding cobras, they had more cobras, and it became a family business, where you sort of generation after generation, you have more cobras and you kill them, and then you earn money from the government, right? So this is not something that was anticipated. When the British learnt of this, they ended their scheme. Everybody who had so many cobras lying around their houses, they released the cobras, and the total number of cobras in the world, in the country, increased and not decreased. This is something what happens when we look only at the data without looking at the wider picture. This is a picture of a Chinese sparrow. Communist Party took over in China, and Mao Zedong made a decision that now that the state controls means of production, we will improve agricultural productivity. So they identified 4 pests, right? What were the 4 pests? Sparrows, rats, squirrels, and a few other, one more thing, right? So they decided to kill all of them. There were rewards announced that kill these 4 pests. So people went out in hunting parties, killed millions of sparrows to ensure that the agricultural productivity doubles. But what happened as a result of that? So the sparrows were killed, but as a result of that, the pests and insects that ate the crops and the locusts that fed on the crops increased. The sparrows used to eat these insects. As a result of that, there was widespread crop damage. And guess what? There was a famine, famous famine of China, 1958, I think, right? And then millions, tens of millions of people died in the famine, right? That's what happens when we track metrics without looking at the wider picture. One more example, a principle of context and environment, very, very important, right? This is an image of the Challenger space shuttle. Challenger space shuttle blew up in 1984, killing the Space in Teacher program. Space tourism industry was about to be born in 1984 when this disaster happened, and it killed that industry forever, right? And now it is being born, of course, again, maybe almost 45 years later, we are talking about space tourism again. Why did this disaster happen? They had thousands of metrics that they were tracking, checklists that they were tracking. But the rocket itself was out in the ground and it snowed, and that made the O-ring fragile, which was the rubber sort of ring on which the rocket was supposed to take off from. As a result of that, the rocket crashed and the astronauts died, right? So that's another example of not looking at, of only looking at the data and suffering unintended consequences because they did not look at the larger environment. Another example, Starbucks, right? This is a good example actually, because this is not a bad example. It's a good example of looking beyond data. If you are running a coffee shop and you are measuring your success, and you measure your success only in terms of number of coffees sold, right, or number of cups sold. But Starbucks decided to look at that problem a little bit differently. Instead of looking at number of cups sold, they said, let's create an environment where people can hang out, they can talk, they can use the internet, they can read. So let's create a place, a third home, away, not home, not work, a third place where people can hang out. And this contextual awareness helped them in creating a multi-billion-dollar brand, right? Again, not focusing on narrow metrics, but focusing on the larger picture. There's the principle of innovation. We had a talk about that in the morning. IBM was into mainframes, and of course, they lost out to Apple and Microsoft in personal computing because they were too focused on the numbers of mainframes sold, which were huge machines, which were sold to big corporations. They didn't worry about the small machines, which could be sold to all of us, right? And they lost out in that race. 3M is an alternative example where they, instead of tracking productivity metrics, which would be what is the amount of work you did in the number of hours available, gave 15% of time off to employees so that they could do whatever they wanted, right? Innovate, work on whatever project you want. And that resulted in improvement productivity and was known as one of the most innovative companies. Later on, Google adopted the same model. Let's talk about the principle of adaptation. Very, very important. One example is Kodak. Have you heard of Kodak? Almost somebody must have said Kodak moment to you. The company is dead. And they invented the digital camera and they were killed by the digital camera. The same dilemma that is facing Google right now, right? Because they've been sitting on artificial intelligence for so many years, because artificial intelligence will eventually kill their search business. So they have not launched it. And as a result, other companies have gotten ahead of them and they are lagging behind. So they need to buckle up and deal with this problem. But this is essentially a failure to adapt on the part of Google and on the part of Kodak. Nokia, how many of you have heard of Nokia and BlackBerry? Isn't it? Right. Nokia was dominant player in the mobile phone industry, the likes of which we cannot imagine, right? Everybody had a Nokia. BlackBerry invented internet on the phone. They invented email on the phone. They invented Messenger that all of us use every day, right? But they still couldn't adapt because they couldn't adapt to the disruptions brought by Apple. And I'll tell you in a minute what the disruption of Apple was, right? Netflix is a good example of a company that disrupted itself. Netflix started as a DVD subscription business. So this was their DVD. So they would send a DVD to your house and then you'll have to return the DVD. That was their business. They were profitable. They were doing well, but they disrupted their own business and said, we are going to start a streaming service because we see internet catching on, isn't it? So that's an example when you are not worried about your monthly numbers increasing, but you look back and say, okay, this streaming is rising. This is how people will consume movies in the future. And I need to be mindful of that. Principle of systemic leadership. A great example is Apple, because Apple's genius was not just creating a good phone, which is what everybody else was doing. Nokia was creating a great phone. BlackBerry was creating a great phone. Apple did not just create a phone, they created the App Store. They created iTunes, isn't it? They created an ecosystem where everybody else could develop and publish their own apps, and the company could benefit from that. And now they are in a very unenviable position because they are gatekeepers, right? Rent collection is the easiest job in the world. You create something and everybody pays you rent, isn't it? So they take 30% of whatever the developers make this was the idea behind creating of an ecosystem. The one who owns the ecosystem owns the market, because ecosystem also makes it difficult for other people to, leave your network, right? So this is how Apple beat BlackBerry and Nokia. These are all examples of people not paying attention to traditional metrics, but looking beyond the metrics. Amul is a great example. Instead of worrying about liters per sold or margin or price per liter of milk, they focused on creating an ecosystem where farmers were paid a fair wage, where their life was predictable, they could earn money, they could rely on Amul, Amul could rely on them, and it created one of the biggest milk distribution companies in the whole world. This is the summary of what I have discussed. It's important. Metrics are essential, but not absolute. Be aware of unintended consequences. Context and environment shape your outcomes. So step back, look at the environment. Innovation thrives on systemic thinking. So think about the systems and not just the narrow slice of data or information in front of you. Adapt or risk obsolescence. So you have to worry about what is happening in the world right now while you prepare for your exams and look at your marks and have discussions like this. What is the one revolution which is reshaping the world right now? ChatGPT. Yes. So how will ChatGPT change the world? How will generative AI change the world? What you're studying, what you're learning, when you apply it, how will artificial intelligence disrupt that? How will artificial intelligence disrupt all of our lives is something we need to think about, right? Because that is the one big change in the environment which is happening, and it is something we need to respond to and be prepared to. And before we can respond to it, we need to understand it. So I hope those examples and that those stories helped you. Thank you.